All right. I think we're live. Marty, can you hear the music?
Oh, I can hear the music.
All right. And I know we're live. Ladies and
Okay.
ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends, Romans and countrymen, give me both of your ears because we have a spectacular show scheduled for tonight. And we have Marty Vargas with us. And we'll get into that in just a second. Isn't the music great? Wow. It's wonderful. You're listening to the George Espenlaub Show, coming to you live from the Funny Farm. So everybody out there, welcome to the Funny Farm. You will never be the same again. You might not know it, but your family and friends, they'll recognize it almost instantly. Whether you're down the street, around the corner, across America, or somewhere around this great big world, we're delighted to have you. Come in. The chat room is open, and we want you to be a part of this show tonight. Now, if Espenlaub can push the right buttons and move the right things around, we'll have a great show. If not, and he blows it up, it'll end up being a menagerie. But anyhow, we welcome each and every one of you. Long Monday. Now it's time to sit back and enjoy yourself and listen. This is an incredible story. And it will bring you to tears. I'll guarantee it. Everybody loosen up. Stretch them out. And then sit back down. Because by the time this thing's over, I think you'll be sitting right on the edge of your chair. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to us live from the Funny Farm. And we're beaming out to Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, VIP Network, Spotify, and all those other places. We're splattered all over the place. And we're so glad that you're with us tonight. I better check on one thing because I did it last time, and lo and behold, I did it this time. But that's all right. That's all right. That's what this live stuff is all about. Wrinkles, blemishes, bloops, blops, and blurps. It's all that. Marty, I thank you. Let me put this back down here for a second. I thank you for being with us tonight. Uh, we had some technical difficulties on Marty's end, and I'm telling you what, you talk about taking the game right down to the final seconds. At the final seconds was ticking away. Marty, march back in. It's good to have you, my friend.
Oh, George, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show. Thank you. Thank you.
My oh my, Marty fought traffic, uh, getting home. And he lives in New York City, so you can just imagine what that is like. Uh,
Oh, my.
and then he gets home, and we run into some technical difficulties. But we'll keep our fingers crossed and hold our tongue just right,
hmm
and hope that these technical difficulties will go away. So, Marty, here's what we can do. We'll make a plan right now.
Okay.
If I get cut off and go away, the show's yours. You just keep going.
Okay.
If you get cut off, I'll just keep it going, and eventually
Okay.
one or both of us will make it back. But
We'll come back together again.
yeah, somehow, some way, we've got some folks in here. Uh, there's Miss Cassandra from Arkansas. She says, "Good evening, guys." Uh, there is Robert, Funny Farm. Yes, yes. He is familiar with the Funny Farm. Uh, and he gives us a thumbs up. And go Marty.
Well, thank you.
And then our good friend out of Columbus, Ohio. Good to see you guys. It's good to see you too, Ed. Uh, Ed helps me on my Twitter because I'll tell you, I'm a real dunce when it comes to working that Twitter stuff, Marty. You know what I mean? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know to go left, go right. I it just befuddles me. But
Mm.
let's get down to the issue. Marty Vargas, tell me just a little bit about yourself, Marty.
And past or present.
Well,
And
let's start with the past, and we'll work our way up.
okay. Well, I had a very unusual beginning, and they found me sleeping in the snow with my homeless mother. And the couple that found me, my mother eventually kept me alive in the streets for about 7 months, living in the streets of Philadelphia. And then she gave me up to this elderly couple who then whizzed me away. I was adopted, and they whizzed me away to California, and I grew up in California. Then 21 years later, I went to go find who my mother was. And actually, it wasn't that I was trying to think about my mother. It so happened that my adopted brother had died, and they transported his body back to the East Coast. And it was when I was in Philadelphia that a cousin came up to me. Her name was Joanne. And she asked me, she said, Marty, would you like to find your mother? And I never thought about that ever in my life. I grew up without a mother. I mean, I was just like, with my new parents, of course, but without my natural mother, I should say. And it stunned me. And she said, she's homeless. And that night I could barely rest, realizing the very woman that brought me into this world was somewhere out there sleeping on a church bench or somewhere in an alleyway or in the street somewhere. And it was like getting lightning flashes going through my mind about who this woman is and that the fact that she was my mother. And so that actually began the journey for me to try to discover the hidden past of my life, something that it was very dark to my knowledge.
Wow. So during your 20 years, 21 years in California, did it ever occur to you that you wanted to seek out your natural mother?
No, never, not once. What happened was, because I came up in such a loving family, the family that adopted me embraced me as their own child, and I felt sense so much love. I almost felt hurt to even think that I was not original with this family. As a matter of fact, when my adoption finally went through when I was at age 13, I resented having the picture taken with my adoptive papers, my adoption papers. And because I felt like, now this kind of verifies I'm not an original child of this couple. But later on, after finding my mother and having to process that type of bitterness in the sense, I understood it was for a better good. It was for a higher purpose that my life was actually preserved because I realized if my mother had raised me in the streets, I probably would have been dead or in jail. When I was working on my documentary that aired on television, I was out filming one night and a woman said, "What are you doing here?" And I was in the Italian market in South Philadelphia. And I said, "Well, I'm making a documentary about a homeless woman." And the woman said to me, "Rachel?" And I'm like, "Rachel? How do you know Rachel?" She says, "Oh, yes, we used to find her babies. She would give birth to children in the street. We would find them dead." And it just struck me that I could have been one of those children. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And so when my knowledge grew in understanding, and I, divorced myself from the emotional, why did you not, raise me type of mentality, then I realized, this was for a better good because I never would have been alive. You know what I'm saying? I would have ended up like one of those children that they would find in the trash can or on the side of the road. I was, very grateful, when I understood this, you know what I'm saying? And so my adoptive parents, they were so loving and so kind and wonderful. My father, my adoptive father, he was a strict type of individual, a disciplinarian, and he made sure I didn't get away with anything. My mother, on the other hand, my adopted mother, was so compassionate and loving. It sort of balanced, my character out. I kind of needed those spankings or belt whips or whatever you want to call them as we were little, because I was rambunctious all over the place and all that. But mom, she was just like very loving and kind. So what happened was, when I went back and I was 21 years old and I went back because my adopted brother died of a massive heart attack. And that's when Joanne said to me, "Would you like to find your mom?" And I didn't know who she was. And so we started our adventure throughout the streets. At the same time, my cousin Joanne, she went into the newspaper. Well, she went into the library to search out newspaper articles that were written about my mother. And it described my mother with as a 50-year-old woman, 52-year-old woman with gray stringy hair and eyes dead. And one of the things that really struck me in the article is the reporter asked her, "Do you ever get lonely? Do you ever cry?" And she responded, "I cannot cry." And that kind of struck me to realize that the very fountains of sorrow and pain have actually been dried up, that you can suffer beatings, rape, muggings, etc., and still you don't feel the pain enough to cry. And that gave me the impetus to not give up in trying to search for her. And one of the first stops is that we met her ex-husband, who is still holding on to some garments of her, a leopard coat that he had bought for her when she was younger. And but I left his house wondering, how is it that you love her so much, but she's still on the streets, you know? And of course, they both, there was some background issues there. And I write about that in the book. I write about all the issues that precipitated my mother to live in the streets, because not only did I experience this, I actually researched it. I went to documents, I did interviews with people. I also went through and combed hospital records and so forth. And so there was this mass amount of information that I was able to ascertain about my mom. But at 21 or 22, somewhere in there, I was trying to find her. And we would comb the streets, the darkened streets of Philadelphia, and we couldn't find her. And the next day, we couldn't find her. And the next day, we start going down the street and that street and one alley after another. And I remember coming to Ninth Street. Ninth Street is the Italian market. And for those who are listening and watching, you may remember the movie Rocky. Sylvester Stallone running down the street and they're saying, "Rocky, Rocky." And the Italians are selling things in the market at a discount price. Well, that's where my mother lived. My mother lived there for over 20 plus years. Matter of fact, till this day, there's a picture of my homeless mother in one of the butcher shops on Ninth Street in the Italian market in South Philadelphia. And you're from Delaware, right? So you're acquainted with the Italian market.
Right.
Now it's changed a lot, yeah. And there's Gino steaks and Pat steaks that are there, and they became famous and all that. So that's sort of the area where my mother haunted, if I would be allowed to use that word. But I didn't find her there. And when we arrived there that night, it was very interesting. I'm going to speed backward for a second. Before we got to Ninth Street, we were going through Market Street, which is uptown Philadelphia. And uptown with those bright lights and expensive department stores could not flood out the strains of poverty and despair. We were in the winter time. And during that time, as you very well know, Philadelphia has about 30 miles of heat vents underneath the sidewalks and the streets. And they give way to these geysers that spew, out of the streets. And what the homeless people do in order to survive and stay warm is that they cuddle up in boxes and they lay these boxes on top of these geysers. And they're willing to even scorch their face or perhaps even get burned severely and maybe even killed, just simply not to freeze to death at night. And as I was going through the streets in Philadelphia, and I was trying to, of course, I was going through the alleyways and so forth, and over these crates where people were sleeping and trying to figure out, is this my mom, And so I was going from one makeshift cardboard box house to another, trying to find her. And one of my fears was, whoa, what if I find her dead?
Mm.
And because people, some of the homeless people, their only claim to fame is that they've frozen to death in the streets of Philadelphia, especially during February, January, February, and the harshest portions of of winter. And I remember coming across an old drunk that was lying there, and my heart stopped. I thought to myself, is this my mom? And as my searching eyes were scanning the face of that person, like, the sigh of relief just left my searching heart. And thank God it wasn't her. And at that moment, the reality of finding her hit me so hard. My cousin Joanne looked at me and she says, you want to continue? And I'm like, no, I can't do this. Emotionally, I was not prepared. And I think in that sense, speeding back to childhood and growing up, I never knew my mom, but there was always resonant within my heart, in the deepest cavity somewhere in a darkened room, that fear of ever meeting her. Because I remember that night as I was looking for her, all I had was these haunting memories of a woman called Rachel, the woman I knew nothing about, the woman who suffered beatings, rape, and mugging, etc. I knew nothing of this. All I knew is that I do have a mother somewhere out there in the darkness. And it's so kind of crazy, because as children, we have these crazy imaginations. And when I was a little boy at age 6, I was still living in Philadelphia because we moved away when I was 7. And I remember having to use the toilet, to go pee. To pee in the bed would have been death to me because my father would have whipped the mess out of me. And yet again, I couldn't hold it till morning. But I remember going up those steps in that, row house. And in the old days, those steps were like totally wood, not uncarpeted. And you could hear the creaking as you go each step and hoping no one's going to hear me. And I remember when I got to the bathroom, and in these row houses, on the 3rd floor, we would have these moonlights or whatever, these glass type of windows on top of the roof with a chain. And in my childhood imagination, I was wondering if she was watching me. It was like, does my mother exist and is she watching me? And I was so afraid I peed out and ran down the stairs as quickly as I could, So I think in the deepest cavity of my mind, I have a real physical mother, but what happened is that was all eclipsed by the home where I was, where I grew up, and I felt so much love and authenticity in that home, And so at this point now, I was on a mission. At this point, I was no longer a child. At this point, I had to face reality. And this taught me a lot because, I realized the only way to deal with your fears is to face them. You know that. You're an experienced person. You've accomplished a lot of great things in life. And oftentimes the things that prevent us from accomplishing things are just these resident fears that sort of hide within us. And I knew I had to face this. And for some reason, for the very first time in my life, I wanted to face it. And I think one of the reasons why is because I realized my mom was in such deep need. She was homeless. Now it's verified. She was living in the streets. Who's going to help her? Who's going to bring her to that point of finding peace and taking care of her? And somehow something happened inside me that I can't explain. I felt driven, that I actually had to do this. I had to find her and I had to help her, And I guess you could say it was love in its infancy. And it wasn't just simply like duty, but there was something in the motive that was driving me forward. And that's precipitated me to search every single day to try to find her, And so when I was going through street after street and I didn't find her, it started to become a little disappointing, you know what I'm saying? And not only disappointing, the powerful thing about it was even though I was being disappointed, simultaneously the drive was still driving me. If you understand what I'm saying, you have these setbacks, but yet again, something keeps on pushing you that you can't give up. You're not going to stop until you actually find what you're looking for. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then eventually I came to this large Catholic cathedral, and I figured, well, maybe they have homeless people there because, oftentimes churches take people in. And I banged on the door, and it only came back with an empty echo. And I realized, wow, what did we do next? But the search continued. I'm sorry, I don't want to keep talking. Maybe you have some questions or
No,
something.
no, no, no. I'm intrigued by what you by what you're saying. Uh, I will ask you this: from the time you started, and then you can go where we left off. From the time you started, how long of a time period was it from the time you started until you found your mom?
It wasn't very long because what happened is family members and people we knew that she lived within a certain geographical area.
Hmm.
And so it wasn't the length of time, it was the intensity of the time, you know, the intensity of the experience. I'll give you an example. When you're in pain, the greater the pain, the longer it seems, you
Yeah.
know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And that's what it was several days, before I actually find her. But it wasn't finding her that was difficult. It was getting her off the streets. You would normally think that she would want to come, but she didn't. You know what I'm saying? And this precipitated a series of years of events that a tragic events to try to bring me to the point and bring her to the point where we could eventually be together. But I remember as I left that church and I started walking down the street, Joanne earlier during that day was dialing up every homeless shelter, looking for her. And we came to this one shelter, and I remember that big red door. And I remember banging on that door. And I realized this is perhaps the last barrier between my dark, distant past. And I grabbed Joanne and I pulled her close because I didn't know what we're going to see. I've never seen her before. I mean, maybe when I was a little child, but the memory was not there. And I said, we have to pray. And we prayed. And because I needed strength, because emotionally I was not at that point where I could just deal with this. And after we prayed, I banged on the door, and a young black woman came to the door, and she opened it up, and we asked for Rachel. And she said in her Philadelphian accent, "Your mother, she's a beautiful person." How they speak in South Philly. It's kind of cool. And they led us down this long cement corridor. And I remember as we were going down this long cement corridor, we're coming towards a gymnasium. And you can see the pane glass, or through the pane glass, through the gymnasium, shifting shadows of people waiting on the other side of the door. And I remember as the door burst open, there was a rows of homeless people, and they just parted for us to walk between them. And there was my mother. I picked her out quickly among those shifting in those that dimly lit auditorium. And the auditorium was like pitch black nearly. And when we were going through the auditorium, they led us up to a gymnasium stage, if you can imagine this. We got a pitch black auditorium, a gym stage, and then floodlights coming down on that stage. It was like we were in some theater of the universe, like nothing else existed. And Joanne and I, and the woman that I would now know to be my mother, went up on this stage and we sat down in 3 chairs. It's so strange. It was like 3 chairs. And Joanne took my hand and she took my mother's hand. And she said, "Aunt Ray, this is your son, Marty. And Marty, this is your son, your mother." And I got up and I put my arms around her, and hugged her to try to assure her that this moment was real. But she only responded with a silent, unbelieving gaze. It was like, this is not real. And that night, I sat there trying to find the answers to the questions that have pricked my heart. What caused her to leave the land of the living to make her abode with the dead? Why is it that she's been homeless at this point by about 21 plus years. You know,
Mhm.
where do I find the answers to this? And as I looked at her, I couldn't ask her, of course, those questions. It was just mysteries that were just coursing through my brain. But I noticed when my mom, her teeth were missing due to being beat in the street by somebody who wanted the small change of a defenseless woman. Her hands were large and her nails were long and callous, and it was dirt all through them. And her feet were like eroding due to the dirt that oozed its way through the seams of her shoes. She was in a deplorable situation, but yet again, at the same time, she was beautiful to me, you know? My heart just kind of just rejoiced. I was so overcome with happiness. You know, I found my mother. This is like, who finds their mother? You know what I'm saying? And especially if she's been homeless for over 21 years and been missing all these years. And I just like fell in love with her, you know? And I was sitting there listening to her and just asking her questions, and a small tear just came crawling down her cheek. Now I was so happy that it didn't even move me to sorrow or anything like that. And so I asked Joanne, please get her something to eat. And Joanne went off and we just talked, and I told her that God can change her life. You know, I know that God somehow is in the author in the background of this story, that God can change her life. And it so happened it came time for us to leave. So we left, and I promised to return the next day. And when I came back the next day, it was so strange, George. She was sitting in the same chair that we had left her in. It's like she stayed all night, hoping that we would return. And when I got back, of course, I asked if she was hungry. And then I began to talk to her and love her and just be a friend to her. But then there was something and I don't know if the listeners are ready for what we're going to talk about next. But I think, it took me a long time to share this portion that I want to share here because I think it's so appropriate. And, as I share this next section, it touches so many young people, so many young people. Joanne looked at my mom and she said, Aunt Ray, Marty has a question for you. He needs to ask you something. And she looked at me and I looked right back at her and I said, who's my father? And she looked at me and she said, how is Nan? And I paused for a moment and I said to myself, why is she asking me about Nan? Now, remember the story of my brother who died,
Mhm.
who had the massive heart attack?
Mhm.
My adoptive brother, my brother by adoption, he had the heart attack, and it was because of his heart attack we shipped his body back to the East Coast to bury him.
Mhm.
But his name was Nan. And then I realized what she was asking me. I said to her, I said, well, Nan died. And that's why we came back. We came to bury him. We just had the funeral. And then at that moment, a tear popped out of her eye and started crawling down. And she just stared at me, just stared. And then I realized the answer to my question. Nan was my father.
Mm.
My adoptive brother was my father, my biological father. And it was his parents, my real biological grandparents, that actually found me sleeping in the snow with my biological mother, with Rachel. And they were the ones that took me in. But the funny thing about this, they did not know that I was their biological grandson. That's how loving they were. They took me in because of the need. They didn't even know that I was really their grandson. That just blows my mind to this day. Such loving people. And they found out that I was really their grandson when they were processing the adoption. And the reason why I know this is that after I got back from my trip, I asked them about it and said, yes, we knew, but we didn't know till you were 13 years old. For 13 years, they didn't know I was their real biological grandson. and they kept that from me. So strange, because every time a social worker would come into the home, and because I was being adopted, so they viewed my case all the time. My adopted mother would always take them into another room and whisper and talk about stuff, and I'm wondering, what are they talking about, George? And that's what it was. And when I was researching for my book, because I have this in my book, and it's like tons of other material in this book that is not, we can't talk about on the radio because it's not enough time. But I had my adoptive records open, and of course you have to go to court, you have to petition to court. I wrote the papers myself, and I was able to finally get all my adoptive papers and find out who this person is and that person is, and so forth. And so my mother was like flashing back when I was sitting there talking with her in that school auditorium. She was remembering the love that she had for my biological father. And of course, that thing never worked out between them. And he never told me that he was my father, you know? And, I'd like to share that, there are a lot of men out there that have children, that, no one knows that they're your children. I think it would behoove us to sometimes step up to the plate and be a man, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And find those children, and of course you have to use prudence of how you do this and how you approach it and so forth. And when you do it, and timing is important. But there are a lot of children out there with fathers. They really need their fathers. I was one of the fortunate ones that I had a father. He was elderly by the time I grew up in my 20s, but he was always there. He was always there. He was a carpenter. He was a carpenter foreman, or what we call general foreman. He was a foreman over all the foremans. But when he took me in, he was retired. And so he taught me how to do carpentry and how to make things and do roofing. I remember up on the roof doing 110 degrees, California heat wave. And he's over there sipping lemonade, made me do all the work. But, boys need dads. I guess I want to say that.
Right.
And so my mother was struck. She was broken to find out that he was dead. And at that moment, when I saw her brokenness, I broke. And I quickly got up. I excused myself. I found an empty hallway. I leaned my head against the wall, and I just teared. And I was like, God, why? You know? And finally, after a while, I was able to recompose myself, go to the bathroom, wash my face off, and come back into her presence. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk so much. Just kind of like, I think because I was so reserved on that point for so long, I think it's important to be able to share that part of the story.
My, oh my. You, Marty, you, you're doing a fantastic job. You've got a captive audience. Uh,
Well,
wherever they're listening or watching, I'll guarantee you that they are captivated. I know I am. I know I am. Uh, what an incredible story. So what happened next?
okay, what happened next was it was time to leave. I had left college because of my mom or my brother who died, who's really my biological father. Found my mother, but I had to go back into life again. And I remember hugging her, holding her, and the nun coming, taking pictures of us. And I put my arm around her, and she could barely believe that anyone wanted to be so close to her. You could sense that. And she put her head on my shoulder. And I remember as we walked out, I looked back at the beautiful face of that small woman who was my mother. And I turned around and I was walking away. I broke down. It's like an avalanche of tears just spraying out of my eyes. And I had to leave her. And I went back to private college. I went to Pacific Union College. Excuse me. It's a beautiful college on top of a mountain in Napa Valley. And I remember as I was studying there in history, I just couldn't stop thinking about my mom. And so I got up in the middle of history class and my eyes were just filled with tears. Quit college. I start hitchhiking all the way home to where I grew up out of college. And I bought a ticket and I flew back. I flew back to try to find my mom. And this time when I went to find her, I found her differently than the first time. The first time she was in a shelter, she was all cleaned up. They got her presentable, I guess you say, to me because they knew we were coming because phone calls were going back and forth. And when I was searching for her in South Philadelphia, I found her sleeping in a broken down alley. Glass was everywhere, rubble and rubbish was everywhere. And she only had a small slip of a dress around her, and she had an old, nauseating smelling wool coat wrapped around her body. And I remember as the sun was just setting at that moment, and you could see the glimmering light, the golden glimmer of the light coming down into that alleyway. I squatted down and I looked right where her face was, and she was still sleeping. And I said, Ray, and her eyes just opened in startled embarrassment. And I began to tell her that there was something better for her. I began to tell her that God can change her life. You know, this is the only way I can do it. It was an impossible situation. She had been homeless for over 20 years. She was more than acclimated. She was more than adjusted. She was a part of homelessness. She was homelessness. And as I looked at her, a flash came in through my mind. I saw like a picture of Jesus in my mind. And I thought to myself, she was Jesus. And what I mean by that is that somewhere in the Bible it says that if you help people that are unfortunate, you're helping him.
Right.
And I begin to realize there's a mission in this. And more than a mission, I'm in the heartbeat of it all. You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is an unavoidable situation. It's my mom. It's not somebody else. You know how we pass people all the time that are homeless or someone who's disabled, maybe a vet or whatever, and we don't feel that attachment to that. But for somehow through her, I was becoming attached to all them, And so I spent time with her. We lived, we loved, we laughed together. I would buy her clothes and bring them to her, sweaters and clothes, and bring her food. I would wash her feet in the streets. I would wash her hands, her hair, and I was always trying to get her to come home with me. And that first trip back was very interesting. And that first trip back, I felt like, I'm going to get her to come home with me. So I went to where she was in Second Street, and actually it wasn't Second Street, it was 9th Street. And I came up to her and I began to talk to her and I said, I'm leaving. I want you to come home with me. And she cursed me out, F me out, you mother effer, you F this, boy, worse than any sailor you would ever imagine. She blew smoke in my face. She just rejected me, and I was pleading. At this time, everyone kind of knows this is Rachel and this is his son. So you got all these people peeking out from windows and storefronts, and they've seen this scenario, me coming to help her day after day after day, and they were all watching. Well, she would not come home. And so I went back to California. And then several months later, and I don't know how many more months, but I returned again. And I remember it was during the winter time as well, and perhaps around Thanksgiving. And my mother was out in the streets, and I always was trying to protect her. I was trying to figure her out, so I was making notes on her life. Anything she said, I wrote them down. That became the basis of the book that I wrote. And so I would listen to her mumble and talk, and I would jot everything down. And then one night, we were sitting on a cardboard box, and I was getting ready to leave the next day. And I was just singing to her, trying to comfort her. And then if I would stop singing, she would say, no, keep singing, keep singing. So I would sing some more. And suddenly, George, out of nowhere, I don't know how he got there, but this man appeared. He was a thuggish type man, big, husky, and with a very strong bro. And he said to me, you know, Rachel, I want you to forgive me for all the things I ever done to you. But I want you to know one thing. I want you to go home with your son. And this big, tough guy, you could see the tears swelling in his eyes as the night lamps of the street were just penetrating that one scene. And I just looked at her, hoping that those words settled in. And yet again, for the second time, she refused to come home. And now it begins to become more hard because, or harder, because my heart now is invested in this, you know, vested, really vested in this. And I remember just being driven through the South Philadelphia narrow streets, just looking at one cobblestone street and then all these brick row houses and wondering, how am I ever going to do this? You know, George, this is an impossible situation, you know. And then, of course, I went back again. It's like, I'm not giving up. You know, I went back. Total was I think 4 to 5 trips, you know. And I remember the next time when I returned, I spent several months there with her. And I would stay up all night with her because I knew, and now I understand why homeless people are sleeping during the day. You think they're just lazy bums. Well, some of them, of course, are lazy bums, but they stay up all night so no one rapes you or robs you.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they stay up. And then when the morning comes, and they're safer to sleep while regular people like you and I, if we're regular, whatever, we're on our way to work. You know, we're not going to bother with them. You know what I'm saying? But under the veil of nighttime, of course, the riffraff come out and the people came out. And it was during that experience I began to understand homeless people in a deeper way. I understood how they are, how they live. Matter of fact, when I was working on my documentary about my mom, I even stayed a night till about 4 o'clock in the morning in a homeless shelter and I saw how they sleep and everything else. Well, my mom would sleep outside most of the time. Sometimes she would be in freezing cold weather. And I remember one time, this is going to blow your mind, and I hope and turn off some of our listeners, but I think, you know, real is real, right?
Right.
George, real is real.
Uh-huh.
My mom was not allowed to go into any restaurants because restaurants, of course, they're going to eject anyone who doesn't seem to be as presentable, I guess. So my mother had to defecate and urinate in the streets. And I remember one night, and it's almost like a movie that you can't really, you know, this reality you can't really screenplay, you know, in a sense. It was just raining, 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 and my mother was under an awning, you know, and the rain was just coming down. You see the rain everywhere. And I came up to her and I saw, you know, where she had used the bathroom, and I didn't know it was her, but I saw the trail leading back to her. And I looked at her and it's like I discovered her. And she was like, what are you looking at? You know what I'm saying? Real tough, you know. But also there was mucus just dripping out of her nose. It was cold, it was raining, and it was like, this is the real deal here. You know, this is what really happened. Now, people might be thinking that are listening, how did your mother ever get there? And, you know, I'll say that for the book when, you know, if they go to Marty Vargas, MartyVargas.com, I go in great detail documenting what are the events that precipitated my mother. For some that may not know, George, my mother was immaculate, immaculate. She kept the house clean from all my interviews with people who knew her when she was younger. She took a bath twice a day. but a certain events took place in her life that led her to where she was. And that would be in the book, along with a lot of hundreds of other experiences. But then one day, when I left her that night, I said to myself, George, I said, I wonder if she senses that there's a little reserve in me. In other words, I have this thing about germs. I'm not a germaphobe, but I don't like dirtiness and smells and all that type of stuff. I mean, that's just normal for all of us, right?
Right. Right.
And but there was something holding me back from really loving her, you know. And when I got back to the apartment where I was staying, I came to the conclusion I have to choose to love her. Irrespective of the nauseating smells that permeate from her body, from the defecation, the urination, 5 weeks old coffee, stinking up the pores of her skin, her matted and woolly and tangled hair, the lichens crawling over her body, the fact that she picks her skin sometimes and actually eats it. I had to make a choice to love her. And, that's not humanly power. He would not really, but I know God will give us the strength if we make the choice. It's like when you do the right thing, something happens where you could actually do it. You know that. You're a man of experience. And I made that choice. And the next time I saw her, and it was very strange, I drive up in this beautiful Eldorado with chrome on the side, and I get out of this car, and of course I'm looking, like a decent human being, and I get out of there, and I sit next to her, and I put my arm around her, and suddenly she looked at me, and the way she looked at me, you can see in her eyes that she knew that I really cared. I saw it. I don't know how words can describe it. There's no verbal exchange. It's just, how it is when you look at somebody and they could tell and you could tell and they tell you could tell and you could tell they could tell. Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And at that moment, there was this guy, a street cleaner. He was pushing a broom down the street and he stopped and he looked at me and he looked at her. He looked at me and he looked at her, looked at me, looked at her, and said, "What are you doing with the thing like that?" And I shot back and I said, "She's my mother."
Mm.
Suddenly he was embarrassed and he just kept on pushing the broom and he disappeared down the street, And I think that moment was a defining moment for me. It was a moment where I had to love somebody unconditionally. I had this attachment to her because she was now my mom and I understood that, but her condition distanced me. It really distanced me. And I had to overcome that distance. And the only way was to choose to love her. And when I did that, somehow the love just came, you know? You know how that is. So we all have situations in our life where we have to make a choice about something. And then when we do it, it actually materializes. And so, of course, my mother didn't come home. That wasn't enough. I used to try to get her to get into a car, and she would never get into a car. She was wise enough not to do it, but stupid enough not to do it with me because I would have taken her. And that could be because in her past as a young girl, she was raped in a car and controlled. The doors were locked and all that type of stuff. And I described that one little experience back in the book. Yeah, I don't know how much you want me to go on. I don't want to bore your audience.
No,
You
no.
know, you sure?
I'm
You
positive.
sure? Okay. And so, I came back several times to get my mom. Then it came to the point, and maybe I shouldn't tell you this part, but I figured the only thing left to do is a kidnapper, you know. And so we had a family member that worked in the pharmacy, and he gave me some special drugs that should do it, you know. And before I did this, I actually planned it out, you know. I went to South Philadelphia, and at that time in history, South Philadelphia was a rough place. A lot of violence, a lot of things that shouldn't go down were going down. And I would see some of this. And you would hear the screaming, the yelling, the fighting, you know, all this craziness. And so what happened was I took some binoculars. I sat in a park right across from where my mother usually sat on 9th Street. And I was timing the intervals of the police cars coming through. And I noticed that they came every 10 minutes, and I jotted it down. So I figured once a police car passed, I only had 10 minutes to act. So we had this plan, and the plan was this. I would drug her coffee. She would go to sleep. My cousin would come around. He was my male cousin, my other cousin, who would come around, grab her by the arm. I would grab her by the other arm and race her to the car. We had a car in the waiting. We had a driver, and the police car just went by. My mother finally fell asleep. She rested her head on my lap, and suddenly another police car went by, and I knew this is the opportunity. We grabbed her by the arm. We started racing her towards the car, and suddenly she broke loose from us, George. And she said, "I'm not going." You know what I'm saying? I'm like, wow, you know, it was so perfect. It was so precise, but it failed so miserably, man. And so I tried to reason with her until 4 a.m. in the morning. Now remember, it was a February month. It was cold. And the wind was blowing up these small tornadoes in the street. You could see the leaves just twisting in the air. And finally, from 11 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning, pleading with her, I finally squatted down and I looked her dead in the eye. And I said, "Mom, let me tell you why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I love you. And I have a place prepared for you." Mm. And at that moment, the little lady who couldn't cry, her eyes began to swell with tears. And she said to me, "I want to come, but I'm afraid." That was the hardest moment, I think, up to this point, trying to get my mom off the street. It's so interesting. I had bought my ticket, and I bought her ticket to return with me by faith. When I made this trip, George, it was my last trip. I depleted every penny in my bank account. I remember when I was in California before I made this trip, withdrawing the money from the bank, and the teller saying to me, "Mr. Vargas, don't you understand? You have nothing left in your account if you take this out." I said, I know. I took out everything. I quit college in the middle of the quarter. I just had to do this. And so I remember as I left her there that morning, I went to where I was staying, and it's so strange. I got there in the apartment, and one of my relatives was playing something on the radio or something. The song was saying, "I thank God for everything. I count on my blessings every day." And I was hearing these words, and I grabbed a towel and I went into the bathroom and I started weeping and sobbing. I said, "How can I thank God for this?" You know? At this time, my whole heart was totally invested in this. And as a young man at 21, 22 years old, I was totally broken. Totally. There was nothing left in me. I was so broken. And then we got to the airport, and something happened to me that shook me to my core. I had forgotten that I had bought her a ticket. And when we got to the airport, the teller was putting all the information in, and he said to me, "Mr. Vargas," or she said to me, "Mr. Vargas, is Rachel Brancalasso here with you. And it hit me that I failed. You know, the ticket was there, the plane was ready. I had a place already prepared in California for her. And suddenly I dropped my head and I started to cry. So I never cried like this before. And it was just streaming, and I just shook my head. No, she's not coming, you know. And, that's what it was up to that point. You know, I had to face failure. I had to face my fears. I had to face the unknown. I had to face giving up everything and yet receiving nothing in return, you know. And it all just swelled in me and it broke me down. I thank God to this day that that happened because it taught me something about myself. It taught me about my weaknesses. It taught me about how we could overcome difficulties because the story doesn't end there. And it taught me that I needed to be broken in order to help someone else who was broken, you know? And so that's kind of like part one of the story. you know, I don't know how much longer you want me to talk. Um, I don't know how much time, but if you have any questions, you know, you could ask whatever you wish.
Let me put this book up here. That is the book. It's gripped me. I was sitting here thinking, Marty, there's a song that a man wrote entitled "When He Reached Down His Hand for Me." I don't know
Mm.
if you've ever heard it or not.
No, I haven't, but that's beautiful.
When he reached down his hand for me, I was lost and undone without God or his son. But he reached down his hand for me.
Mm.
I
Wow.
believe I believe listening to your account tonight will make everyone aware that each and every one of us is truly our brother's keepers.
Mm.
Uh, through the whole thing, as I sit here and listen, I couldn't help but think, as much as we don't understand as we go through life, and there's so many things that try to take our attention. There's so much noise out there today. I couldn't help but think, another man wrote a song, Andre Crouch, he's passed on now, but he wrote, "Through it all,
Mm.
I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God." And somehow, some way, there are people listening and watching that the storms are blowing. Perhaps the valley is deeper and darker than it has ever been in their entire life. They're going through some
Mm.
circumstances and their situations that, as you mentioned early, humanly speaking, there's no way out. There's nothing can be done. But yet, through it all, and I couldn't help but sit here and think, not only did you write a tremendous book and showed that unconditional love that God shows us, but yet I sat here and I thought, my, what a tremendous opportunity for each and every one of us that's listening this tonight. And this will continue on, Marty, because people will continually watch this. They
Mm.
will continually listen to it. And somebody out there that's walking through the deepest, darkest valley of their life, I just want them to know that through it all,
Mm.
there's an answer. And when you spoke about something had to be done with you, you had to be broken, you had to be humbled. Oh my. You know, we're the clay, he's the potter. And if
Mm,
we just let him, he breaks us and molds us,
mm,
makes us into what will bring glory and honor to him.
mm.
All right. Marty, my goodness gracious. Ladies and gentlemen, please, please, there is the book. And here is where you can get it at amazon.com forward slash place dash you dash Marty dash Vargas homeless. Uh, what Marty was speaking about tonight took us to a certain point. Now, let's go buy that book. Let's and let's find out what happened. And we'll continue. We'll continue to put this up and we'll continue to keep it on our show page and we'll continue to push this out. And ladies and gentlemen, if you know someone, and I'm sure we all do, that wasn't able to view this or listen to this tonight, please make sure you tell them you've got to hear this. You've got to hear it. Marty, God is in this thing. There's one more thing I'd like for you to do before we let you go.
Okay.
Your life has been blessed, and I'll let I'll let you tell the people of what you are doing now.
Okay. Yes, of course, I'm a writer, and I also help people. I teach people how to let go of deep emotional problems in their life. And it's taken me all across the world, actually. I've been the speaker in at least, I don't know, 10 different countries in the world, teaching people how to let go of things because when I got broken, I had to learn to let go of certain things. I mean, of course, I'm in radio, I'm a, television engineer, and I have a whole bunch of other things that I've accomplished and everything, and I've been very good at these things. But the thing I'm proud about the most is that I can be used as some instrument to bring people to the point of healing, whether it's through their divorce, whether it's the loss of a child. I've dealt with cases, notable cases of murder and so forth, helping families heal to get to that point. And for that, I'm very, very grateful. And of course, I've been a documentarian. I've had my work on television, but I just want to find, George. I'm like you. I know you're on a mission. You just don't have a radio program. You have a radio program to help people, and different topics, different things. You enlighten people, you educate them, and you bring them to a certain point. And I believe that one of my purposes is to bring people to a certain point where they can let go and start living again, you know, and I'm happy about that.
Marty, you're a prince of a man. You really
And
are.
thank you.
I mean that.
Thank
And I
you.
have said, and I know our listeners, by the way of radio and live streaming, have heard me say it countless times, but I always listen to see if I can hear an individual's heartbeat.
Hmm.
I can hear somebody's heartbeat. I know that person is for real. And Marty Vargas, tonight, I heard your heartbeat, and
Hmm.
I know you're for real.
Thank you.
I pray that
You too.
I pray that God will keep you right smack dab in the center of His hand.
Hmm.
Just the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord,
Hmm.
and I believe that He'll lay out your marching plans and continue to lead and guide you, that you might be that instrument that ministers and helps those people. Thank you, sir. My Marty, please stay in touch with me.
We will.
You've got my phone number. You got my email. Uh,
Sure.
you call me anytime, even if it's just to chat. you call me.
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you, George, for that invitation. I'll take it up.
Already, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends, Romans, and countrymen, what an incredible story. Here is the book again, as soon as I hit the right button. A place for you. You know, when he said that tonight, that he had a place prepared for his mom, I couldn't help but think of what Jesus said.
Hmm.
Let not your heart be troubled. But then he said, I go to prepare a place for you. And when Marty said that he had a place all prepared back in California, I couldn't help but think of what Jesus told us. He's got a place prepared for us too. So God bless you, my brother. Let me put some of these comments up before you go, uh, so you can see them. Uh, Mr. Ed Temple out of Columbus, Ohio. Say God bless you.
Thank you.
Uh, the man, all thumbs up and prayers.
Thank you.
Cassandra down in Arkansas. May God continue to bless you, Marty.
Thank you.
Wendy Wilson said, wow, I'm captivated.
Thank you.
Isn't that the truth? Cassandra said, God is good all the time, and all the time, God is good.
True.
Ed said, praise God, he can do all things. He never gives up. Another song that was written, he never gave up on me. Oh, boy. And there were times, there were times that I gave up on myself, but he never gave up on me. And again, Ed said, extremely interesting show, intriguing story.
Thank you.
And we're gonna be hearing and receiving news and comments for a long time to come, Marty.
Thank you.
And thank you. It's been a privilege and an honor to have you, sir. And I want you to come back again.
Thank you. Thank you. We will. We will.
All right, sir. God bless you. And ladies and gentlemen, whew, wow, what a night. Let's do this while we're still around. And this man said that he was done feeling blue. Get up and stretch out a little bit.
Listen here, I've done made up my mind. And tonight I'm gonna go downtown, 'cause I'm done feeling blue, done feeling blue. Yeah, I'm done feeling blue, baby, over you. Go down to where the sidewalk is. I'll beer and catch up with some friends, 'cause I'm done feeling blue, done feeling blue. Yeah, I'm done feeling blue, baby, oh yeah.
We're going to get ready to get out of here. Boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Romans, and countrymen. We've got a big show planned for you tomorrow night. Now, I'm at the age sometimes I'm thinking about something, and at the same time I'm thinking about it, it just goes right out the other end. But tomorrow night, Anthony Gribbs, who used to be a linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles, is going to be with us. You talk about the energized bunny. My, oh, my, oh, my, oh, my. He makes the energized bunny look like a chump. I'm telling you. Good friend of mine. He's coming tomorrow night, and I'm telling you, this man, this man will come loaded. I mean, he got so much energy. Everything he does, he exuberates energy. So you don't want to miss it. He is still part of the NFL Players Association alumni. He he played for the Eagles. He played for the Browns, and then he went to Pittsburgh with Coach Cowher, and he was the condition coach for a number of years. Uh, and he does wonderful things for the fellas in the football arena, and he lectures to them. He tells them what it's like to come out of football, that there's life really after football. And there are just so many things that he's going to share with us tomorrow night. So when you come tomorrow night, wow, he will. He's funny. He's serious. Uh, he's a keynote speaker. He travels. He is just a wonderful individual, and I know that you'll just fall in love with my friend Anthony Gribbs, and he'll be your friend before it's all over. I'll guarantee you that. My oh my, Marty, thank you, sir, one more time.
Thank you, George,
for coming and being with us. God bless you, and wow. Until then, folks. Yep. When you hear that, you know that Espenlaub's getting ready to move on out. It's time for him to pick up and get out of here. Listen, from all of us here at the Funny Farm, and there's a bunch of us. There's Miss Gertrude Duflicki, Miss Ernestine, Charlie, Harvey, Travis, Pammy, Dorothy, and the list goes on. All of us here at the Funny Farm. We thank you for tuning in. We thank you for your support. You can email me at georgece at comcast.net. That's georgece at comcast.net. So please do so. I thank you for all the kind words, all the compliments, all the wonderful things that people are saying about the show. We're getting ready to partner up with some other folks that's going to move us, crank this thing up another notch. I'm just going to hold on and let her rip. Wherever it goes, I'm just going to hold on. But it's going to take us some great places. So until tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, whether you're down the street, around the corner, across America, or somewhere around this great big world, thank you for tuning in tonight. If it's nighttime where you're at, you have a great night. If it's already daytime, you have a fine, fine day. But until then, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here, you come back and be with us. And bring somebody with you next time, too. And don't forget to tell them about the show tonight. I'll see you then. From all of us to all of you, thank you for tuning in. God bless you, and may he keep you right in the center of his hand. Good night, everybody.
Good night, George.